Central Texas gardener, I'm Tom Spencer. Yucca is more than a nursery. It's a celebration of plant exploration. Today, Wade Roitsch shows off a few of their favorite discoveries. On tour, see how it all began on our visit with John Fairy at Peckerwood Garden.
Peckerwood Garden is more than a collection of plants. It's a convergence of philosophy, exploration, art, and passion. It's a path to tranquility for the eyes and the spirit. And it's a meeting of science and soul, where patience and boundaries were tested, along with the plants that found recognition and renewal. Peckerwood didn't start with a sketch. It's been an evolution for both land and man, since John Fairy, professor of architecture at Texas A&M University and a painter, was captivated by another art form.
I had been raised in a garden and in a little community in South Carolina that was there were lots of gardeners. There were probably 5 or 6 or 7 families, and the mother and father in these families both gardened. It was not just the wife doing the gardening. It was very much of a family thing.
But John wasn't a gardener in 1971 when a spring-fed brook on land in Hempstead, Texas, prompted memories of the magical places of his childhood.
At that point, I was teaching in College Station and had a painting studio in Houston. And the commute from Houston to College Station was just a little bit too much.
John's voyage into botanical art and architecture didn't start with an overnight epiphany.
It was a slow process. When I first moved, there were no trees on the front of the property at all. And so friends from Houston started giving me trees and plants and shrubs, this sort of thing, bulbs, all sorts of things. And of course I started planting them, and one thing led to another.
Another chapter began in 1983.
A tornado hit the garden and took out all the original trees that were here. We lost something like 15 big oaks in the garden, and something like 30-something pines came down. And I looked at it and I said, well, it's not going to cure itself by just looking at it. And so I got busy and started working, taking things out and moving things and changing. It changed the whole face of the garden, because what had been totally a shade garden immediately became a sun garden. And now the garden has gotten back and grown up again, and it's more or less a sun and a shade garden.
John recognized a chance to experiment with plants on a new level. Assisted by one of his students, Carl Schoenfeld, later they started Yucca Nursery to populate home gardens with their discoveries.
And then in 1988, after the garden was pretty much established, Lynn Lowry, a very famous plantsman from Houston and from San Antonio, he had nurseries all over the state at one point or another. He invited me to go on a plant expedition to Mexico with him.
And John found another mission.
We'd go down one day and we'd spot a plant and say, well, this is a beautiful thing. We'll come back and collect seed on it 3 months later. We'll come back in 3 months, and the goats had devoured the plants. And so overpopulation, overdevelopment is destroying a great many of the wonderful habitats in the mountains of northeastern Mexico. Lynn took us on 4 expeditions to Mexico, and on those 4 expeditions he taught us how to clean seed, talked about how to germinate the seed once we got them back into the country, how to get them across the border, and then of course after we found out that many plants would not do here that we were bringing in and trialing, we started, and we didn't start, but we got in touch with J.C. Ralston at the North Carolina State Arboretum in Raleigh. And he, in return, put us in touch with the University of California at Berkeley and an arboretum in Seoul, Korea. And we started shipping seed to these people. And they, in return, started shipping us their Asian collections.
With each rescue or experiment, they tested every growing condition. The plants guided Peckerwood's drafting board.
This was influenced by what I saw in Mexico. The old theory is if you don't like the plants you're looking at one point, go around the mountain to the east side or to the west side or to the south side, and you see totally different environments on each side of the mountain. And so I learned from what I saw.
As an architect and artist, John sought a pattern of beauty as well.
It's the transition from one area to another is so important. It's a lot of design and a lot of work to get that to happen. It just doesn't happen overnight. To me, gardening and gardens are about space. And of course, you introduce color, texture, layering of plants, this sort of thing. But it basically comes down to developing a wonderful space, a magical space, as I call it. And magical spaces occur when you have various canopies. You know, it's about light. And in an open space, the light is totally different from in a space where you've got 5 canopies of trees, shrubs and trees.
As an artist who brings the work of other artists to Peckerwood through his Mexican folk art gallery and garden sculptures, John knows that significant beauty takes time.
Well, the thing is, you've got a multitude of things that are taking 12 to sometimes 20 years. I had a magnolia that I bought from Lynn Lowry in the early 70s, and it was 19 years before it flowered. But it was well worth the wait.
It's also about being patient through freeze damage, drought, or failure.
You just have to learn to live with these things. You have to be optimistic about them and think there's something good about it, whatever happens. You could look over on this table over here and you can see tags, plant tags, and there must be 1,000 tags sitting on that table from the last 2 years. And these are things that did not make it. And so a lot of it is trial and error. It's the act of doing that's important. It's the act of planting the plant.
John is still experimenting, though Yucca has moved off-site.
We'll test them in the garden, and some of them we will sell when we have open days. People that come out to see the garden always like to take something home that they've experienced, and so we have a small greenhouse and a small nursery in operation.
He opens Peckerwood to the public throughout the year and by special request. To ensure that his work continues, he formed the Peckerwood Garden Foundation.
I'd put too much work into something that was going to be lost or sold and, just pushed aside. And so I decided to form a foundation, and I did in connection with the national organization called the Garden Conservancy.
Volunteers and a few paid staff assist in Peckerwood's care, learning from the teacher who never stops learning. No doubt all of them ask, why the name Peckerwood?
When I bought the property, I had a friend, had a dog named Beauregard and a very close friend named Maine. And so it comes from Auntie Maine. And Auntie Maine was married to a Beauregard from Peckerwood Plantation in Georgia. And so it was sort of like it was a joke. And then it developed into later, people said, what are you going to name this? And we said, well, Peckerwood Garden. And then, of course, when Carl Shanefield and I developed Yucca Nursery, we came up with the name Yucca. And then we said, well, people need to learn to laugh and be happy about things. And the name Peckerwood at Yucca Nursery at Peckerwood Garden will certainly make people laugh.
Well, now we're going to move from Peckerwood Gardens in Hempstead to Yucca Nursery, which is now located in the central Texas town of Giddings. And joining me is the manager of the nursery, Wade Roitsch. Wade, welcome to Central Texas Gardener.
Well, thank you for having us.
It's one of our favorite segments year in, year out is when we have somebody from Yucca on the program. Just for those who don't know about Yucca, it's a mail order place that specializes in some exceptionally rare and beautiful plants. Tell me more about what you offer.
Yes, we're a mail order nursery. We specialize in succulents and bulbous plants and well-adapted plants, or try to find well-adapted plants for our region. We collect plants from different collectors around the world and travel to other places and collect seed and develop things and offer interesting, unusual things on our website at yuccadoo.com.
Well, I know that a lot of people consider Yuccadoo a go-to place if they're looking for something new and unusual, and I've always thought of it as such. And for somebody who loves agaves like I do, and almost any of the succulents really, or woody lilies like the agaves, your place is really one of the best in the nation, I think, for finding these kinds of plants. Now, you've brought a wonderful array of different things, a lot of which we've never talked about on the program before. And I want you to kind of highlight why you want to recommend these to our audience out there. The first one that we're going to talk about is a pharaoh cactus, and you brought 2 specimens. These are striking plants.
Oh, thank you. They're a species from Baja California, Phaerocactus peninsulae.
Mm-hmm.
We tested them out a number of years ago, putting them in a Hempstead landscape. They took our very wet winters very well, which a lot of cactus often don't take wet winters. They took the cold down to the middle teens quite well, and we dug them up, and they've done well in containers for the last couple of years. So they're very versatile plants, and striking, and so very, something for everybody.
Well, striking indeed. I've seen barrel cactus before, but these have distinctive kind of oval shapes, which are really beautiful, and that kind of fishhook needle on them that is also an incredible pattern.
Yes, and they do have very pretty orangey red blooms in the spring and early summer, and are sporadically throughout the year. So they just have a interest beyond just their form. They've got something exciting going on all the time.
Well, just the form alone would be enough for me. Now, I would assume a raised bed, gravelly soil would be perfect for these.
Yes, for the most part. In Hempstead, because we were low and wet, we tended to mound them up, but they did very well on short mounds. So, if you have rocky, already naturally gravelly soil, they would do fine. But if drainage is an issue, you will want to mound them up.
Okay, well, again, pharaoh cactus, help me out with the botanical.
Peninsulae.
Okay, peninsulae, after the Baja Peninsula.
That's right.
Easy for me to remember anyway. The next is one of the different agaves that you offer, and this is the hairiest looking agave I've seen in a long time. And tell me the botanical name on this one.
Agave multifilifera.
Multifilifera, okay, the cousin of the agave clan, and beautiful plant.
Yes, also is proven to be quite cold hardy, great compact form, takes full sun, equally well in containers or in the ground, once again, as long as you mound it, if you have drainage issues.
Right. Does it pup out aggressively, or is it?
No, this form generally offsets very seldom.
And I actually prefer that. It's hard to control the colonies sometimes when they get going.
Well, that's true, but they're also then harder to propagate.
True.
And to get more of them.
Right. But a striking singular plant, agave multifilifera. Lots of hairs, in other words. Right. And beautiful plant, and again, great compact form. If somebody wants something that's very striking and sculptural but low, that's a perfect answer for it.
And they're great contrast to the big wide-leaved agaves, which we're all typically used to. So it helps you diversify your agave bed or desert bed.
Sure, texture is always important. A couple more agaves right next to you. The small one is a striking cultivar of a plant that I've seen a lot in the local nurseries. Agave Shindigera?
Shadigera. Agave Shadigera.
Shadigera, okay. And tell me more about that plant.
Well, this is a variegated clonal selection selected by the Japanese. A great small compact plant, probably not hardy in our zone, but since it stays so small and compact, it's great if you have a small succulent collection and you don't want to take up so much space, yet have something striking. It's a great little plant for that.
Well, and just thinking about it in as a little container plant, the way that we're showing it here, it's very striking in the pot.
Yes, even as a tiny little plant, and we sell little 4-inch pots, and from miniature on up to mature size, they're always people are always drawn to them.
All right. Well, the banding, the color of the banding, I think is really the reason for that. So, Shidigera. Okay, I'm gonna let you handle the Latin from here on out. But a great little plant. Now, the one right next to it, I've seen before, and this is a striking individual specimen of the species.
Yes, Agave geminiflora. It's a great agave for if you tend to like to overwater a little bit, and also tolerate shade a little bit more than some agaves.
Okay.
But it has a fairly soft texture so that if you land on it, you're not impaled forever.
Not forever. Note the forever part.
You might get pricked, but it won't hurt you forever. Right. But it's this plant was grown in full sun, so that's why it has its real tight form. If you grow it in shade, it's a more open, looser form. It's still very attractive. And like I say, I always promote it because it's tolerant of a little extra moisture.
It's almost like the pencil cactus of the agaves.
Yes.
But it does have a sharp little point to the tip there, so just bear that in mind. But a beautiful little plant.
This one has great filifers, but they vary amount, and then little hairs that are on the margins of the leaves, so some may not have any little hairs at all, and others will be just almost you can't see the leaves.
Okay, geminiflora.
Agave geminiflora, correct.
Okay, that one is easy. I could do that. Now we have an aloe right between us here, and I love the color of this.
This is an aloe aristata hybrid. It's a plant we got a number of years ago. Really not ever had it completely properly identified, but has always been an outstanding plant in our collection. Usually grew it as a pot, but we put it out in the ground this year and took our cold of the mid-teens very well with only outer leaf damage. So very hardy, great for containers. Also a plant that won't impale you if you like succulents.
Right. And more people are experimenting with the aloes. And I think people are very anxious to include more aloes in their home collections. And what I'm finding is that I think we're surprised by how cold hardy so many of them turn out to be.
To a large extent, but this last winter kind of brought us back to reality.
Yeah, I think you're right. So one more time on the name of this?
We call it aloe aristata hybrid.
Okay.
Because there's a true aloe aristata, which is much smaller and more compact, but this is a hybrid.
Well, we only have a very brief amount of time, but I want to show these two plants besides. These are Dickeas. Dickeas, and these are plants that I know that people will enjoy working with. Many different forms of these, and you can just get a taste of these beautiful terrestrial bromeliads.
Correct.
Right. Well, Wade, real briefly, yuccadoo.com, right?
Correct.
Okay, well, people can check you out online and order all these beautiful plants.
That's right.
And we appreciate you coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Coming up next, it's our friend Daphne.
Hello and welcome to Down to Earth. Our question this week is from a viewer whose Texas mountain laurel didn't bloom this season and why that might have happened. You know, there are lots of reasons, but the first thing I would look at is whether or not this plant was in the full sun. The label on this one will tell you partial shade is okay, but as with any plants that flower, if they're listed for full sun, they will flower better if they get that full sun. You also want to look at your watering. Too much water on these plants is not good for them, especially in our clay or poorly drained soils. Also look at any insect activity. Some insects may eat the flower blooms. And you might have mistakenly removed those flower blooms because they do look very different than any others. It's a very pendulous spike that hangs down from the growing points, and it really doesn't look like a flower bloom when you first see it. These plants don't require any fertilization in general, and too much nitrogen may also inhibit the flowers on this plant. Our plant this week is lantana. There's so many cultivars available that I won't list an exact cultivar for you, just to say that you should look for a color and a size that you're interested in. Most of these plants are root-hardy woody perennials, which means that they die back to the ground in the winter for us here. Occasionally we'll have one be evergreen, but this winter I doubt that any would have been, and in fact we may have lost some of these plants because we were so cold this winter. We do have some native species, and those species do have more berries, which are more attractive to birds, but they also mean more seedlings around your yard. Most commercially available hybrids are sterile, so they don't produce as many berries, and they do flower more without deadheading those berries off of those plants. Some of these plants are large and shrubby, but others are ground covers that stay very small. So as I said, pick the color and the size of plant that you're looking for. As with many plants, available cultivars in this one change each season according to the new plants that are available and have been hybridized by growers over the season. These plants love heat and abuse, so plant them in full sun on the south or west side of your home if possible. They use very low water, they're not too particular about soil, and they flower all summer from spring to frost. A few to dry are Texas Flame, which is an orange, red, and yellow flower, and Samantha, which has a yellow flower with variegated foliage. To do this week, if you've waited patiently and still have some holes in your landscape, go ahead and fill those in now because you've likely lost some of those plants. We'd love to hear from you, so visit klru.org/CTG and send us your question or plant of the week from your garden.
Thanks, Daphne. Now let's check in with John Dromgoole.
Hello gardening friends, welcome to Backyard Basics. A lot of questions come in here at KLRU about organic fertilizers, and so I'd like to explain a little bit about them today, show you some. You may be a new gardener and unfamiliar with them. And they're really nice. They don't leach, they don't pollute, they're really sustainable. And so I'm going to show you first some compost. I think if you didn't use anything at all, good homemade or commercial compost would be ideal. Homemade's the best, really. And so compost is very important. It brings in many nutrients, and you can really see that soil change. Another one of the fertilizers that used on lawns quite a bit is this one. Texas A&M used it, and they beat many of the commercial, or all of the commercial chemical fertilizers. So the city of Austin even recommends this one here because it doesn't pollute. It grows a pretty blade of grass, nice runners, and a good deep color with thicker blades. So a good organic fertilizer for the lawn. Now you can use your spreader with this. That's important because it makes it so much easier to use a broadcast spreader. Now when you're preparing the soil to put your marigolds in and your other flowers in, you work in something like this one. This is a 464, and that higher middle number is the phosphorus, and that stimulates roots and flowering on the plant. So this is a real important one. The nitrogen and the potassium a little bit lower, but that's how it works. It's really nice. And you can see the numbers are much lower than they are on the chemical bags. Some of those big numbers are really unnecessary. So try organics sometime. This is cottonseed meal. This is a 1200. So when you only need nitrogen, like green leafy things, then you would use the cottonseed meal. You work these fertilizers into the soil, because they are broken down by the soil microorganisms. So that's an important part of this, getting some life into the soil. Need a little iron and potash? This green sand right here covers that. This is a real neat product. If you want to green something up, add some green sand to it. And it's a problem solver too. Here we are with earthworm castings. Boy, if you're planting or building a potting soil, earthworm castings could be the very best thing to put in there. We've tested them a lot, and they're really wonderful. And if you're not familiar with earthworm castings, you ought to become familiar because it really gets plants off to an important start. Now these are trace minerals right here. The balance of the fertilizer program is to have the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, and so a balance of micronutrients are very important also. Compost brings in a lot of them, but this right here is available at nurseries, and there are several types. That's not the only one right there. But when you need those essential trace minerals to balance a program, if you really want a well-tuned organic garden, then the minerals are also very important. They're also called micronutrients. And so there's a granular one right there. It's slow to break down. You don't need a lot of micronutrients. You only need a few. So, yeah, I mean a little bit. So you go ahead and you work something like that in there. So if you've got container plants or you're getting things off to an early start in your garden, there are other products. Like this one right here is pure fish emulsion, just fish in there. That's a nitrogen source. And so, like we said earlier, that's what greens the plants up and gives it a whole lot of vigor. I like to blend them with some other nutrients or use these other nutrients separately. And seaweed are excellent for spraying on the foliage and drenching a plant to stimulate the roots. It has some hormones in there that'll do that. Some products have everything blended into it with some other ingredients like molasses and liquid humus. That, if you want to buy just a single container, then that's the type. And there are other flowering mixes, and this is an example of one. If you really want to stimulate those container plants, then something like this would be excellent. In our soil, we're short on magnesium, and so if you add, when it's also known as Epsom salts, if you want to add that, that'll make all the difference in the world. There you are, Backyard Basics and a good fertilizer program.
Thanks for joining us. Until next week, I'll see you in the garden.
To learn about today's program, watch online and follow CTG's blog. Check out klru.org/CTG.